There's a moment in every athlete's life that the cameras almost never catch. Not the trophy, not the celebration, not the press conference where everyone already knows what they're supposed to say. I'm talking about the moment when no one is watching, when an athlete thinks they're completely alone, and they still choose to be exactly who they are. That's the moment this story is about. And I'm telling you right now, you did not expect to feel what you're about to feel. Picture the Foro Italico on a quiet May morning. The clay is that deep terracotta red, the kind that stains your shoes and smells like old earth baked by the sun. The main draw hasn't started yet. The stadium is still half asleep, and most of the top players are doing what professionals do before the real pressure hits: resting, drilling, keeping to themselves. Alex Eala had just wrapped a morning session on one of the outer courts. Her coaches were loading up gear behind her. She had a first-round match the next day, a tough one, and everything about this moment should have been purely about tennis. But then she spotted them. Near the players' exit, a small cluster of people, maybe 12 if you're being generous, holding Philippine flags. Some had handwritten signs. And here's the thing that gets me every time I think about it. They had been standing there for hours. Not because anyone guaranteed them access. Not because a PR team promised them 5 minutes. They were standing there for the same reason people have always done quiet, stubborn things, because hope, even when it's unrewarded, is somehow enough. Most players would have kept moving. I want you to really sit with that because it matters. These weren't sponsors. They weren't journalists. They weren't courtside ticket holders with lanyards and access passes. They were just people, regular people who loved her. And the security staff was already drifting their way, getting ready to redirect them. Now, slow down with me here. Because what happened in the next few minutes unfolded in layers, and every single layer hits differently. The fans leaned forward. What was she reaching for? A marker, maybe? Her phone for a quick selfie? And then out came a stack of shirts. Not generic tournament merchandise, not sponsor gear with someone else's logo. These were shirts from her own personal clothing line. Something she had designed herself, built herself, as a direct thread back to the people who believed in her before the results made it easy to believe. Nobody asked her to do this. There was no camera crew. No social media manager holding a ring light. No brand activation scheduled on a clipboard somewhere. It was just Alex Eala, a bag full of shirts, and a group of people who had traveled a long way to stand in the Roman heat and hope something would happen. The first shirt went to a little girl in the front row, maybe 10 years old, a Philippine flag tied around her shoulders like a cape. Eala crouched all the way down to her level, held out the shirt, and said softly, "Para sa'yo." For you. The girl looked at the shirt, then looked up, and completely fell apart in the most beautiful way imaginable. Tears streaming, her mother beside her already crying before the girl even started. The whole crowd went quiet. Not because someone told them to, because some moments are simply too large for noise. But then Eala did something that I think is the real heart of this story. Instead of turning back to the fans closest to her, she looked through the crowd, all the way to the back. And she found her, an elderly woman, leaning on a cane, flag still raised high even though her arms had clearly been shaking from the effort of holding it so long. Eala walked toward her, past everyone else, and stood directly in front of her. "You've been standing here all day," she said. "This one's for you. I genuinely don't know how to tell you what happened next without sounding like I'm overstating it. But I'm not." The woman took the shirt with trembling hands and pressed it to her face. Just held it there, breathing into it. And then she looked up at this 22-year-old tennis player and whispered, "Salamat, anak." "Thank you, child." And Eala pulled her into a full embrace. Not a polite hug, not the quick photogenic kind. She held on. The people standing around them weren't cheering. They were just watching, some crying, some with their hands over their mouths, because by that point, everyone understood. This was never about the shirts. Here's where the story became something the entire tennis world couldn't stop talking about. 50 feet away, half hidden in the shadow of one of the stadium's side corridors, dressed casually, deliberately keeping a low profile, stood Roger Federer. He had slipped out through a side entrance specifically to avoid exactly this kind of moment. The crowds, the recognition, the constant gravitational pull of being Roger Federer in public. He wasn't trying to be seen, but something made him stop. And for the entire duration, every shirt, every hug, every whispered word, Federer stood completely still and watched. He didn't wave, didn't approach, didn't even reach for his phone. He just watched. And at some point, almost to himself, barely audible, he said 4 words. "She gets it." A tournament official standing nearby caught it, just barely. And when someone asked Federer what he meant, he didn't explain. He just kept watching, then quietly turned and walked away. Now I have followed tennis for a long time. I've seen generosity. I've seen kindness. I've seen athletes do beautiful things for cameras, for causes, for the public record. But here's what made this specific moment spread the way it did. The security footage leaked before anyone even knew Federer had been there. The original clip that went viral was just Eala handing out shirts, embracing that elderly woman, crouching down to the little girl. That alone was enough to move people. That alone would have been the story. But then someone noticed the figure in the background, partially obscured, standing very still. And the internet did what it does, zoomed in, adjusted the brightness, argued about it for about 40 minutes, and then confirmed it. Roger Federer, 20 Grand Slam titles, arguably the greatest player to ever hold a racket, standing in the shadows, completely unannounced, completely unnoticed, until he wasn't. People rewatched the clip specifically to study his face, and what they kept seeing, what they kept describing the same way over and over, was wonder. Not pride exactly, though traces of it were there. Not surprise, though he clearly hadn't expected any of this. Wonder. Like he was watching something he recognized from somewhere deep inside himself. Something he thought you had to earn through decades before you could really understand it. Here's the thing about Roger Federer that gets swallowed by the trophies and the highlight reels and the perfect single-handed backhand. He has talked in quieter interviews over the years about the real shift in his career. And it wasn't technical, it wasn't tactical, it was internal. He's described how, when you're young on tour, the current flows almost entirely toward you. Coaching, resources, attention, opportunity, all of it pouring in, and you absorb it because you have to. But at some point, if you're paying close enough attention, the current changes direction. And the players who figure that out early, the ones who start giving before the world tells them they've earned the right to, those are the ones who last, not just in career length, in meaning, in what they actually leave behind. Alex Eala figured that out at 22, and Federer watched it happen from 50 feet away and recognized it immediately because he remembers exactly what it cost him to learn it. This story is bigger than one morning in Rome. Eala's path to this moment is anything but conventional. In 2018, at 13 years old, she was awarded a scholarship to train at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain. She arrived with a suitcase and a dream and, by most accounts, not much else. No connections, no safety net, just talent and the willingness to outwork everyone around her. The academy gave her everything: world-class facilities, elite coaching, and a philosophy about tennis that runs much deeper than technique. Because Nadal's philosophy, for those who've followed his career closely, has never been purely about winning. It's always been about people, about surrounding yourself with the right ones, about treating whatever platform you're given as borrowed, and understanding that the interest you owe on it is paid in how you treat others. Eala absorbed all of it, and then she went out and built a career that by raw numbers looks modest. Just over $1 million in career prize money, and endorsement portfolio that's growing, but nowhere near the upper tier yet. A ranking still climbing, but the numbers miss everything that actually matters. She launched her own clothing line, not for the income, but as a direct line to her fans. She designed the logo herself. She thought carefully about what the brand should stand for. And then, before a tournament in Rome, she packed some of those shirts into her tennis bag. Not because a manager scheduled a fan activation, not because a contract required community engagement, but because some quiet, unhurried part of her thought, if I see someone today who needs to feel seen, I want to be ready. I keep returning to that detail, because I think it's the one that separates intention from character. Intention is deciding in advance to do the right thing. Character is doing it anyway when the moment is inconvenient, unexpected, and completely off script. Eala didn't plan the fans. She didn't plan the timing. She certainly didn't plan Roger Federer standing 50 feet away. She just looked at a group of people who had spent their entire day standing in the heat for a single chance at a moment and gave them far more than they came for. After the video passed 15 million views, after the comments flooded in from Filipino fans calling it historic, from tennis journalists calling it significant, from casual viewers who had never followed a single match in their lives but found themselves unexpectedly moved by 2 minutes of grainy security footage. After all of that, Federer still said nothing publicly. No post, no statement, no interview comment. Just silence. And in the specific strange language of tennis culture, where what someone chooses not to say often carries more weight than anything they do say, that silence read like a standing ovation, because Federer doesn't validate casually. He doesn't linger in places he doesn't mean to linger. He doesn't stand in shadows watching unless something has genuinely stopped him. Something stopped him, and whatever that something was, it felt like recognition. The recognition of a person who understands, really understands, what this whole thing is for. There's a line Federer said once in a quieter interview that I think about more than I probably should. He said, "The trophies fade, the relationships last forever." He said it almost offhandedly, the way people say the truest things, slightly embarrassed by how much they actually mean it. Alex Eala is 22 years old, and she already knows that. Not because someone handed it to her in a speech, not because it was written in a handbook somewhere, but because she showed up at 13 with nothing, and people chose to believe in her anyway. She felt what that felt like, and she never let herself forget it. The little girl with the flag, Kate will eventually forget the weight of that shirt in her hands, but she will never forget the moment that a woman she had admired from a distance, crouched all the way down, looked her in the eyes and said, "This is for you." The elderly woman with the cane will someday not remember every detail of that Roman courtyard, but she will remember being walked toward instead of past. She will remember being seen when she had fully expected to be invisible. And Roger Federer, who has witnessed more extraordinary tennis than nearly any human being alive, who has played on stages most athletes will only ever dream of, who has shaken hands with presidents and held trophies in cathedrals. He will remember a courtyard in Rome where a young woman quietly did something that nobody required of her, and did it anyway, and didn't look around to see who was watching. He was watching, and he smiled like a man who had just been reminded why the whole thing matters. What is a legacy, really? Is it a ranking? A title count? A highlight reel that lives on a server somewhere? Or is it the slow accumulation of small, private, unrequired choices? The ones where no one is holding you accountable except yourself, that eventually add up to a kind of person? Alex Eala is still building hers. She has matches left to win, surfaces left to conquer, rounds left to fight through. Her story is nowhere near finished, but somewhere in Rome, in the quiet after the fans dispersed, and the flags were folded away, she stood alone for a moment with a lighter bag. And she smiled. Not for the camera, not for the brand, not for the moment that would eventually be seen by 15 million people. She smiled because she had given something away and felt richer for it. And 50 feet away, a man who needed 20 years and 20 Grand Slams to fully understand that truth had just watched a 22-year-old. Already live it. She gets it. 2 words. Barely a whisper. The loudest thing Federer said all year.